All right. Now, a couple of classes ago, we were um, bibbidi bobbidi boom. We were working with 3D, or I should say, we really were working like 2.5D. So when we did 3D layers, it was the idea that you could have an object and float it around in space. But it didn't actually have depth. That's different than maybe like, a 3D program, maybe like Blender or something, where, if you have a program like Blender, if I were to start a new file, you can, move around the object in 3D space, zoom and move around and whatnot. So we're actually going to do that here. Now, to work with a 3D model in After Effects, the file has to be saved as a particular type of file, and we are going to, it's a type of file known as a GTF or a GLB or a GLTF file. Now, I'm going to give you one that you can bring in here. I'll also show you some places you can find examples of this. So what I'm going to do is go back to After Effects, and we're going to import a file. Let's go to today's files and we're going to bring in Burger GLB. So it's that format I was talking about. And I'm just going to click and drag this here. Okay. And I'm going to say, okay. Actually, let's try that again. Um, what we're going to do is we're going to make this comp size. This means if the model was built too big in the program it was used, like Blender or 3D Max or Maya or whatever, this is going to scale it so that it fits inside of our project. And I'm going to hit OK. And then, whoop, there's my burger. Okay. Now, you'll notice I have these little widgets. I can use these to move my character in 3D space. And I can also rotate this character in 3D space as well. If I want to kind of play around, we can use these dolly, pan, and orbit tools. The dolly tool allows me to sort of, move around my scene here. I can dolly in and out. The pan tool allows me to pan, and the orbit tool allows me to orbit around the scene. So I can still move it or try to rotate it in 3D space. Okay. I can even try to animate this in 3D space. So I'm going to hit R for rotation. And, we've learned about how, once you notice how my object is set to 3D or is set to be a 3D model. If it wasn't doing that, I don't think you can even have a 3D model like this without doing that. But, I can click here and I'll set this to rotate, maybe 3 rotations. It's going a bit fast, but there's my spinning 3D model. You can see it has depth, maybe something like that. Okay. I can move my model. So do positioning. So I'm gonna hit P for position, and I don't know, maybe I'm gonna have my model hit P. Let's move that over here. This is going backwards in space. Okay. Going a little bit fast. Maybe I'll slow it down like that. Maybe I'll have it spin. Oops. All right. All right. Now, in this case, I gave you a 3D model. What if you wanted to, I mentioned, maybe this is not a 3D class, so how could you get a 3D model? One of the places you can look, one's a good one called Poly Pizza or Poly.pizza. This is a free site for downloading 3D models. So I don't know. Let's do, we have a burger, maybe like a kitty. Okay. So I don't know. Here's this cat. Maybe I want, maybe I want this cat as, and so, I'm gonna download this file, go to where it says download, and then just make sure it's a GLB file. This is the file if you want to click and kind of look around it and such. And I'm going to bring this into here, file, import, file. They've called it Marcy for some reason. Marseille, say, okay. I'm going to bring this in. Once again, I'm just going to call this kitty, and under object size, let's make it comp size because the model, once again, is a bit um, too big. And I'm gonna hit, and there's the character. And let's kind of zoom out a little bit. Might want to see this in relationship to the other model since they both exist in the same 3D space. I'm gonna rotate him. Okay. All right. So once again, it's like, all right, why don't I'm gonna have the character kind of start back there, hit position, and I'll go forward. Okay. All right. So you can, bring in actual 3D models. Like I said, if you want to check out one of those websites I have there, like Polypizza or CTR Trader, just make sure the one that, just make sure you set it to free. Make sure you download it as a GLB 3D format. Then you can bring it in and then begin to work with it in 3D space. Mhm. All right, the thing about 3D models in After Effects is that you technically can't apply effects to them. So for instance, you can see if I want to select this burger and maybe I wanted to try to apply, I don't know, a Gaussian blur or something along those lines. I can't do that, right? So that's kind of a pain in the booty, but there is a kind of thing that, there is something we could do to kind of get around this. I'm going to create what's known as an adjustment layer. So if you remember, an adjustment layer allows you to apply effects to anything below it. So I'm going to take this adjustment layer, and that is what I'm going to apply, maybe like the Gaussian blur. And when I do that, you can see that is a way of sort of getting around this kind of issue where now I can blur this particular item. Or maybe I want to, oh, I don't know, maybe tint. All right, I got my tinted red burger here. Looks good enough to eat, huh? All right. All right, so that, to do this requires you have a 3D model. If you're interested, you may want to consider taking the DIGM 14 course. Usually it's offered in the fall. This is a 3D modeling class. It's also, we do 3D animation. I usually teach it. I don't know if I'll be teaching in the fall. I haven't, but probably. So we will learn Blender, and you can build models in Blender, and you can actually output them as a GLB file and bring it into something like After Effects. So if you know how to do that, awesome. What if though I just want to have some simple text? Is there anything I could do? And the answer to that question is indeed there is. So I got this regular text here. Okay, I just use the regular text tool and set up, settings the way we normally would by setting the typeface and the size and the fill and all that good stuff. And I have a background here, and I want to create I want to create 3D text. Okay. Now I don't want to, I could go to a program like Blender or 3D Studio Max or whatever it is, but that's kind of a pain. So what I'm going to do is instead of doing that, all right, so what I'm going to do with this text is I'm going to turn this on to be 3D, the 3D layer. We didn't talk about this, but what I could do under geometry options is there's something called extrusion depth. And what that does is it takes something that's in After Effects and it will take the contours of it and extrude it to make a very, very basic, simple 3D. So if you can see how do you see how like it's kind of, this is at 0, and this is allowing me to extrude backwards in depth. There's sort of this 1 point perspective going on. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. But, it's allowing me to, you know, set this. Now, it's a little bit, could use a little bit of a touch up. So what I'm actually going to do is why don't we add a light? I'm going to add a spotlight. All right. And just to make this a little bit more interesting, so I have my spotlight. You can see that's already starting to give it kind of a little bit more depth. You can make the spotlight bigger or the cone angle bigger if, maybe the intensity you can play around with, how much feathering there is, something like that. There you go. Um, Another thing we want to do is have a little bit of shine in our faux 3D. So I'm going to go to here under material options. We've talked about the idea of casting shadows. What I'm actually going to do is go to specular shininess. And I'm going to bump that up. And that's going to make my object look a lot more like, see how like bright it looks there in the center? And it's going to just kind of give it more of a 3D kind of faux metallic kind of feel there. Okay. So, I mean, this is creating like a 3D object or 3D depth without having to necessarily go into a program. This would also work, by the way, that was with text, but you could actually do this really with any vector object. So if I were to build a star, I'm just going to build a star shape. And I'm going to set that star to white for the fill. And I'm going to set that also to 3D. And then let's go under geometry, bevel. It may be kind of hard to see because I need to angle it a little bit. There you go. So you can see the depth here. Once again, it's like you can see it gets, longer or shorter. You can even animate that if you want. So you could create like a, you know, very 70s, 80s effect of like having the thing grow over time or something. Very like evil Knievel-y. But like I said, it's like it would help to have a little bit of lighting. So if I turn the light on, there's my, you can play around with where the object is looking at, and how much light's being used. And I'm going to turn on under material. Let's turn on the specularness. All right, so you can create some, kind of interesting effects there. Okay. So you can do a little bit of, 3D even without going to a program like Blender or finding a 3D model. But like I said, you can bring in 3D models into After Effects, which is nice, and you can create some really interesting things and play around with them in the relationship to your 2D graphics. Okay? So why don't you guys try that out? That was exercise 11, 12, 13, and 14, please. Okay?